All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Shahnaz, are you there?
I am. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Shahnaz, and hi, everybody. Welcome. So glad to have all of you here as we talk about this topic of thriving during an uncertain job market, and specifically how to stay optimistic, motivated, and resilient. So what we're really going to be focusing in on today is doing the inner work around helping you to remain effective in your career transition efforts, especially in the current climate that we're in right now. So I'm Lisa Morgan. I'm the Ross Alumni Career Coach. I'm just so thrilled to have all of you there. I looked at the list of folks who registered and I see many familiar names, so I really appreciate you joining us today. And with us also is my dear friend, esteemed colleague, and fellow Ross alumna, Shahnaz Broucek. So welcome, Shahnaz. Oops, it looks like I may have muted you, or you may be muted. So hang on, let's get back over and unmute you. Let's try it again. Okay.
All right, I think I'm back.
I think you're back. I'm not sure why you muted
Yeah,
again.
yeah. No worries. We will have fun with Zoom today, I'm sure. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you for having me. And I'm just really looking forward to spending this time with you and with the alumni on the call. This is a really interesting time for everyone. And, as we're just experiencing with our own little Zoom technicality here, right? And we know a lot of folks are facing a lot of unexpected challenges, and I'm just really glad to be here to share some ideas to help with the inner work that we both know is so crucial, not just for the job search, but for thriving at work and life in general.
Yeah, absolutely, Shahnaz. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. I'm sure that many of you are probably painfully familiar with Zoom by now, but just in case, we are going to keep everyone muted throughout the session, but please do use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to communicate with us. Also, we're going to ask you to do some self-assessing and a little bit of reflection during the session today. So be sure that you have paper and pen or pencil handy, if you would. All right, so just a little bit about Shahnaz. Shahnaz is an executive coach, Ross faculty member, and Search Inside Yourself certified teacher. In her work over the past few years, she's really emerged as a mindfulness and self-compassion expert, which is why I am so excited about having her talk with us about thriving during uncertainty. She's gone through a number of career transitions herself, one of which brought her to Ross during the Great Recession for her MBA and ultimately led her to the work that she's doing today. So I'm going to go ahead. I see that we have somehow gone to mute again. So I'm going to go ahead
Oh
and
no,
oh no,
I
you're back.
I think
Okay.
I'm here. Yeah. Yep, I'm here, Lisa. Thank
Terrific.
you.
All right. So go ahead, Shana. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no worries. I was just going to say, I think that this for me, this feels really full circle because Lisa was my own career coach when I was here at Ross, when I was in the middle of considering my own career transition, and so I'm just excited to share some of the things I've learned that I think will be really helpful for our alumni.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. And so let me just check and see what we got. Just wonder. Okay. I saw something in the chat, so that distracted me. Yeah. So let's get into the COVID-19 job market. Boy, what a difference a few weeks makes. Who among us, I mean, certainly not me a month ago, could have predicted that we'd be here today? Our lives for the near future feel like they've been turned upside down, literally overnight. And honestly, we really don't know at this point how long it's going to last. And that uncertainty makes it so challenging for everyone. You know, we don't know, is it going to be a month, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and so forth. Um, but there are some things that we do know. We do know that jobless rates went from about 3.5% in February to over 10% predicted in April, and some people are putting it at about 13% right now. We also know that hiring freezes have occurred, that some people are getting furloughed at work, and that other people are experiencing temporary wage reductions. And I'm sure that's impacting some of you. With all that comes some really unique pressures, very reminiscent of 2008 and 2009. It can be pretty frightening. Wouldn't you agree, Shahnaz?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, Lisa. I think, there's clearly a number of challenges people are facing already, or they're worried about facing. It's starting to get very real, right? Loved ones are being impacted, maybe just worrying about illness for people who are at risk. Um, Folks are facing financial worries. They might be dealing with homeschooling. So many different challenges that as you said, we couldn't have anticipated just a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And then, I think too, some of us experienced the Great Recession and had challenges at that time, and might feel very reminiscent of that. I owned a mortgage and title company back in the time that the housing market tanked. So I feel like in some ways I've been through this kind of experience in the past in one way, and yet it's still very unique for all of us. And there might be some people for whom this is the first time that they've faced this, really sense of lack of stability at this level, and could be feeling really vulnerable.
Absolutely. Yeah. So with all that being said, though, the truth is it isn't all doom and gloom in the job market. I just pulled up this data from Candor, and I've got the link out there on the screen, and I'll share this PDF with you afterward. But Candor is doing some real-time data capture and crowdsourcing from people in the field on companies. And if you pull up their website, what you'll see is just a huge database of companies. They've got like 5,900 companies right now. And this slide that I'm showing here is a summary across industry of how many companies within that industry are hiring, how many have put in hiring freezes, and how many are laying off. And I actually just captured this data yesterday, and I had looked at it a few days earlier, and it's actually the picture actually even looks better than it did a few days earlier. So it's a really dynamic situation. But the point of it is some companies are still hiring. I know I had somebody call me yesterday who just got a job offer, so it is still happening. And truly, even those yellow bars will be turning, will be starting to convert to green as we develop more certainty around, the end game, right? And so just an example of that is the University of Michigan. We just instituted a hiring freeze over the last week. And that's due and really because we don't know what enrollments are going to be in the fall, right? So once we get that certainty, right, once enrollments become more certain, then I'm sure that the university will begin to release some of those hiring freezes, and we'll see much more hiring going on. So Shahnaz, when you consider all this, what do you think the risks are to our well-being during a sudden downturn like this?
Yeah, Lisa, I think, what can happen is that we start to tell ourselves, well, I should probably, take a job even though it's not really what I wanted, or might start to compromise our personal vision, and be willing to say yes to something that doesn't align as well with our strengths and values as we normally might prioritize. And the challenge in that can be that we water down our branding, right? And people aren't sure what we really want. And so then it's hard for them to actually help us, right? We're trying to be more open and flexible, but then it leads to confusion about how to actually help us. And then kind of conversely, the flip side of that is maybe being a little bit too unwilling to compromise. I do think it's important to remain somewhat flexible, but that might look like taking a step backward to take a step forward, for example. We've seen, I know, Lisa, you and I have seen lots of instances of that where, people might be wanting to pivot in a slightly different direction. And in order to make that directionally correct move, they do take a step backward. That can be true even in the best job market, right? So I think it's important to kind of balance that, compromising your personal vision with being unwilling to compromise. A little bit of a balancing act there.
Yes, one thing I might interject there is
Yeah.
For people out there who are thinking about that, I mean, I think that's a very real issue. You know, when do you compromise and when don't you? And so that's something that you should definitely feel free to reach out to me on as a career coach, you know, to just be that kind of sounding board around that issue and help you think through it.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's such good advice. I mean, sometimes just by hearing ourselves talk something out loud with a partner can really help to get to clarity. Yeah, great advice, Lisa. And then, just back to kind of the risks, I think another is about procrastinating, right? So if we start to feel like we're not really sure what we should be doing, or maybe we think, we look at this kind of chart from Candor and we think, oh, well, my industry is hiring, so why bother starting now? Might find ourselves procrastinating, right? Kind of the why bother mindset. Um, and then the last thing I would focus on here is just that we can kind of get negative about these sorts of things sometimes and focus on every possible thing that could go wrong, and really get caught up in that negative picture, instead of staying in that forward momentum. So I think those are some of the things to think about.
Yeah, super.
And I also think, our what we're telling ourselves, the interpretation that we have when these risks come up, is so important, right? So the risks to our well-being, and to pay attention to the way that we interpret setbacks like COVID-19 that come up for us. And there are two mindsets about how effectively we're able to move forward. Um, and this is really about mental toughness. And so some of you may be familiar with Carol Dweck's work related to fixed and growth mindset. She wrote a book called Mindset: The New Psychology of Success. And so I want to maybe just, Lisa, maybe we can just share an example of what this looks like, right? Of we run into lots of different difficult client situations. You wanna share one and we can talk it through?
Yeah, so in fixed and growth mindset, an example of this might be an alum who is in job search mode, they're in interviewing, and they go through, one or two, three rounds of interviewing, and they get rejected. And it can become, you can begin to really take that personally and feel like it's you, and start to have that feeling like you're never going to overcome it, right? And so it's so important to realize that often it isn't you at all. That it can be very circumstantial around interviewing, whether it's that an internal candidate stepped up, or the company ended up freezing hiring, or changing their mind about a different position. So I think it's really important to realize that most of the time it has nothing to do with you. And that's not to say that you shouldn't that you shouldn't keep practicing interviewing. Absolutely. And shouldn't keep trying to improve, but just knowing that often it has nothing to do with you.
Yeah, I think that's such a good example, and I can think of so many times when that's come up for folks, and somebody else gets the job offer and they just assume it's something that they somehow did wrong, and they might have been very much liked and appreciated, and other things being equal could have been the candidate, but something behind the scenes was going on that just wasn't as evident.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think it's just so important to pivot. If you've initially, when we get a disappointment, we might initially land in that fixed mindset where we do personalize maybe a little bit too much, and we tell ourselves a negative story, and we might feel a little catastrophic in some ways momentarily. But our resilience is all about being able to shift from that fixed mindset into growth mindset, where we recognize where we have control, what we can actually take charge of, and how we can move forward more effectively in order to keep going. And I think the good news, Lisa, is that growth mindset is something that can be learned, right? And we can cultivate optimism. And I want to share 3 steps to doing that, which I think can be so helpful. The first one is about just being aware that we have this negativity bias as human beings, right? We're really hardwired to pay more attention to the negative than the positive. And if you think about evolutionarily, right, we needed to be attuned to dangers in order to keep ourselves alive. And if you think about an example like maybe you've interviewed with three people and one person seems less interviewed or less interested in you in the interviewing process, who's the person that you remember most, right? It's probably the one who was least engaged. And just understanding that can help shift the way that you see yourself, right? And asking yourself, what's another way to look at the situation can be really helpful. Maybe that person who was interviewing was distracted with other work issues or didn't get a good night's sleep or who knows what else, right? And then the second step is mindfulness. And with mindfulness, what we're talking about here is just being aware of how you're processing successes and failures and bringing curiosity and kindness to your thoughts and emotions that come up for you. How do you explain the event to yourself, right? So for example, if you're successful about something, do you give yourself credit for it? Or are you more likely to just tell yourself, well, I got lucky and kind of downplay your success? And then if it's failure, do you feel helpless? Or what are the thoughts that come up related to those emotions? So just taking a moment to really notice your patterns and being aware can really be helpful, right? If you recognize, oh, well, my tendency is to be kind of negative at first, and but then I do bounce back, and I'm gonna come out of this and think about how I've come out of it in the past. That can be very helpful. And then the final step is what I'm referring to here is transformation, and meaning how you could transform and reframe any disempowered view of yourself or a situation towards growth mindset, right? Where you're just learning and maybe have more self-compassion in that process, giving yourself credit for your successes instead of dismissing them, and incorporating your wins into your self-image, right? It's such an important part of cultivating self-confidence. And then on the flip side, if you face a difficulty or a setback, looking for evidence that maybe this is just temporary, right? It's not the end of the process for me, and that we have this negativity bias, right? But we can choose a different response. And we'll talk a little later about it, but one way to cultivate optimism that we'll explore is journaling.
Yeah. So Shahnaz, while you were talking, I had a couple people contribute to the chat box, and
Yeah.
one person shares that, about the whole idea of 3 to 1, right? That it takes 3 positive items to even out every one negative. And I know you and I are big fans of that whole positivity ratio, right?
Yeah, Barbara Fredrickson, right? And her positivity ratio, we know it's at least 3 to 1, if not 5 to 1 or more, right? We need to fill ourselves up with positivity where we can. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's some great comments here.
I know. Yeah. So, and then Ken shared that, the whole idea of looking for tomorrow, right? I think I love that, that idea, looking for tomorrow, so you can fix things, take time in each day on what you want to get done today, but also think longer range goals. Yep. Super, super great comments. Thanks, everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing
Yeah.
sharing these ideas.
All right.
Helpful. Yeah, and so building on this concept of cultivating optimism, I just want to share a framework for increasing our self-awareness that can help identify where you want to focus your efforts on well-being and motivation. And some of you might be familiar already with Martin Seligman. He's well known as the father of positive psychology, and he's the author of Flourish and Learn to Optimism and several other books. But he created this PERMA model, which is about these 5 core elements of flourishing or thriving. And as Lisa and I were talking about our time with you today, it seemed like these factors related to PERMA were very important, but also this other side, this press side that I'm going to describe, really underlies staying motivated. So we wanted to share both with you. And what I'd like you to do is, as we go through these categories and describe them, on a scale of 1 to 5, just assess how you're doing right now, right? Just as a way to check in with yourself. And the first one that we're going to talk about is positive emotion, right? So positive emotion relates to things like joy, um, fun, laughter. It might even be as big as awe, right? Things that we feel connected to in nature that bring up those feelings of awe for us. But just things make us feel good, right? And so rating yourself 1 to 5 there. And then the next one's engagement. Engagement comes from, feeling in flow because we're doing work that's aligned with our strengths and our values, doing things that we're really good at. The next part of PERMA is relationship. And here we're talking about, how are you doing with your important relationships right now? What's the sense of support that you're feeling from family and friends, maybe your boss, coworkers? How are your relationships doing? And then meaning, which is about, serving a purpose that's bigger than yourself. And it's not always about saving the world, but it could just be about being a good provider for your family or helping others on your team, maybe somehow contributing to a greater organizational mission that matters to you. And then the last part of PERMA is accomplishment, feeling a sense of progress towards something, not just the end goal, but all the steps along the way to getting there and giving yourself credit for it. So as you look at your 1 to 5 on these different areas of PERMA, let's take a moment and share with each other what's something that you're doing right now that's helping you in terms of well-being. Not worrying about what the category is, but just as you think about these general ideas, what's something you're doing that's allowing you to thrive right now? We'll put those in the chat box.
Yes, we'd love to hear from at least a few of you on what's working for you right now, especially in these PERMA categories.
Yeah, there's some great ones coming up here, Lisa. You want to read them or you want me to?
Yeah, sure. I love this. So I see exercising, reading, showing kindness, a lot of walking the dog, trying to reimagine the world.
Posting on my blog, I see up here too. That's great.
Yeah, keep going, Shahnaz. You can read them.
Trying to pick up new hobbies like learning the guitar, taking time to journal the highlights and reflections of my day, remembering and clarifying values, helping others, relaxing and slowing down, accepting this new reality. Yeah, that's really good for all of us, right? Online games with family. I've heard a few people talking about that. I haven't tried that out yet, but it seems like a great way to do it. Playing music, reading, journaling, more frequent connection with extended family, gardening. So many great suggestions that are here. Telling oneself to focus on things that I can influence and not worrying about things beyond my control, right? Hi, Pierre. I see you there. Exercise, retooling, sharpening the saw, skills and projects, playtime with kids and gardening. All great suggestions posting there.
Yes.
Lisa, I wanted to ask you too. I know there's one other one that we've talked about before. You want to share just another suggestion that might be helpful for folks right now?
Yeah, I mean, when you and I discussed this, what came up for me is when I'm working with people in career transition, we do so much work on self-assessment and strengths, like looking at strengths. And for instance, Gallup's Clifton Strengths tool is a great way to really connect with what your superpowers are, and then help you engage and feel more positive about what you're bringing to the table. So I love those kinds of tools that uncover strengths, right, and bigger why as well.
Yeah, I think those are all really great. I do think one of the things I like about Clifton Strengths is that it connects a lot of these different concepts. Engagement certainly is a big piece of it, but it also ties into confidence. We tend to be more confident, right, when we feel like we're doing things that we're good at. We're better able to persevere when we're leaning into our strengths. We're more energized. All of these things really tie in and allow it. Self-compassion, I think, ties into strengths, because if we're having compassion for ourselves, we recognize the importance of using our strengths in our work, right?
Yeah.
And seeking that for ourselves. So I think all of that is really important.
Yeah.
I'm so inspired by, I have to say, Lisa, I'm so inspired by the comments made by our listeners today. Um, One person, James, had written here, writing a paper on artificial intelligence. I mean, you go, James. That's awesome. And Monica getting out in the snow, right? I mean, we did have a little snow here in Michigan today. I don't know where everybody is today, but yeah, we're springtime is always just 5 minutes away, right? So, but let's go on to the press side of this perma-press framework and talk about, again, assessing from 1 to 5, starting with perseverance, right? And you think about when we're best able to persevere. And I think a lot of times that's when we have a big compelling why for something, right? We feel deeply connected to our goals, aligned with purpose and values. And, the word grit comes to mind, right? We're better able to do that when we feel the strong connection, again, to purpose and values. And then resilience. How quickly are you able to pick yourself up right now when there are setbacks or disappointments? Um, we were joking about how even setting up the Zoom call has been an opportunity for resilience for Lisa and I, and maybe some of you guys are experiencing that too. And then energy. It's so important, right? I mean, if you're sleep deprived and you're lacking energy, it's hard to start on any of these other issues and really be able to bring that forth. So it's thinking about physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual energy. Are you getting enough sleep? How's your diet? How's your exercise? Are you taking breaks? Are you, taking time to connect to other people that are important to you? And are you feeling a sense of purpose in everything that you're doing as well? So really checking in and saying, how am I doing from an energy standpoint? And then self-compassion, which has to do with being kind to ourselves about our circumstances, recognizing when we're struggling, and instead of being hard on ourselves, it's having recognizing that we're suffering and having compassion for what we're going through, having a positive inner dialogue. And how prone are you to truly live with self-compassion versus maybe being self-critical? And then the last one is self-confidence, which goes beyond managing your inner critic into really believing in yourself, being aware of your strengths authentically, not to be boastful or all about yourself, but in order to bring your best out into the world. And so again, rating yourself 1 to 5 on these things. We're curious if we can go back to the chat box. I'd love to hear from our audience about something you're doing already that's helping you to stay motivated. There's some things that are working for you right now that might be helpful to other folks.
So Shahnaz, while we're waiting for people to think about this, right, these categories might be a little more challenging. As I reflect on this, I think that these things are so important, especially if you're in job search mode, right? And that job search starts to drag on and feel like a marathon versus a sprint. It's really so valuable to be looking at all these components and thinking, where can I use some work, and what can I do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do see some ideas starting to come in here, Lisa. So things like strategic planning for a great assignment. I'm taking some online courses. I don't know where, but I'm curious to hear about where for those. Some of the ones that I've liked in the past have been through Coursera, COURSERA.org, and edX.org. Those are 2 really great ones, but many others that are out there, working out, connecting with people, compiling a list of free training videos online. There's a lot of shared resources out there right now, which is really great to see. Connecting with friends, and Zoom wine dates with good friends. Great to hear that there's some fun helping to keep people energized. Giving myself grace when I don't feel motivated. Thank you, Michelle. That's really great. yeah, we're all in uncharted territory and it will pass. Listening to motivational podcasts. Yeah, these are all just really, really great ideas here. Um, uh, Udemy has great cheap courses as well. DX has a ton of free ones. Balancing action and reflection. Yeah, so many really. And yeah, taking care of yourself with sleep, diet and exercise, all great things that
Yeah, I
I
love this topic too. Keeping my same morning routine, right? Basically,
enjoy.
stretching, reading reminders to get my mindset ready for that. Yeah, routine is so important, especially as our routines have kind of been turned upside down lately.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
creating new routines.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, and Scott, I see just posted one. I think this is a really great resource. Coursera is offering the Science of Wellbeing. It's most popular course at Yale, and it is a great offering that's available for free online. So something to check out for sure.
Yep. And
Yeah, and
Varun
yeah,
says, agrees with Marco and says setting daily small goals and achieving them as well.
yes,
So
yeah,
true.
that sense of progress, right, towards accomplishment is so important.
Yeah. Awesome.
Absolutely.
All right.
Should we move on to the next one?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and so, one way that you can go deeper on self-awareness is through journaling. And I've seen a few of you mention journaling in our chat room here, but I'm wondering how many of you might actually be groaning right now to hear me say journaling. If you're anything like some of the students that I've had in class at Ross. Um, so some of them love journaling, and then there are others who feel really resistant to it. But I thought I would start by just sharing a little of the research about why I'm suggesting this. And the first study that I want to mention here is about this group of laid off professionals who, for 5 days, they journaled about their feelings, about their experiences. And 6 months later, they had found jobs at a much higher rate. 68% of them had been, gainfully reemployed versus 27% of the other group. And that's, I think that's pretty profound, right? To consider the impact on um, your ability to maybe make sense of a situation and take a perspective by reflecting. And when you write, you get to kind of become the objective observer of your circumstance, which can allow you to be a little bit more compassionate and gain insight. So I think it's a great way to coach yourself and to approach yourself with non-judgment and curiosity. And the second study was a group of 49 college students. And in their case, this was really short spurts of journaling, just 2 days, 2 minutes a day. But that group of students reported improved mood and well-being after just 2 minutes a day for 2 days. So I'm not saying that you need to journal for hours and hours a day, but for even a short period of time, just to give yourself some perspective, can be super helpful. And I see there's a question here about what goes into these journal entries. I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview, which is that we've actually designed, related to PermaPress, we've designed some journaling prompts for each of those that we'll give you after the webinar. And so we'll give you some guidance on those. Now, the reality is, whether you're journaling about something that you're just trying to have more thriving in your life, or be more resilient, whether it's related to that or you're trying to process something difficult that has happened, both things, sort of positive journaling or negative, journaling about some negative event, both seem to lift our mood, right? So it's not that you need to avoid writing about difficult things. It can actually be super helpful to do that. So I think it's good just to be aware of that. And I think in this particular time, my sense of it is that it's particularly helpful to also spend a fair amount of time focusing on where you have control, right? What are the things that you can do to shift into this more optimistic viewpoint? Um, realistically, but also optimistically.
Terrific, Shahnaz.
Anything you want to add there? Or, oh, actually, let me ask folks. Um, I know you and I have some favorite journaling apps and tools. How about our listeners? Are there any particular tools for journaling you guys want to share with each other?
Yeah, feel free to enter those in the chat box.
Yeah, and I'll share a couple that I tend to be an old school journaler. I like to touch the paper and the pen personally, but there's some really great apps that are out there now too that I've heard clients use. I like the Clear Habit Journal. I like Vertelli's Chapters. Those are two of the ones that I've enjoyed a lot. Evernote is great. I see that one coming up. And some other folks like in the old school way too. Just a plain blank sheet of paper can be great too. Um, yeah,
I
there's
know,
some others. Go
I,
ahead, Lisa.
Shanaz, I noticed that Michelle put in the 5 minute journal. That's one that I use. I like the 5 minute journal as well as the
Yeah,
James Clear journal. Those are both
yes,
really great.
yes, absolutely. And then, yeah, Day One is another one that's listed in there. Um, and Journey, Kenzo, Diagram. I mean, there's just several that are out there. And Marco mentioned too, sometimes mind mapping. I think mind mapping is a great alternative to journaling, or a way of doing journaling, right? Making it visual. Lots of great mind mapping tools that are out there that are automated, but also old school, just writing it out can be super powerful. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. All
So
right.
maybe we can try this, Lisa.
Okay.
Um, let's do this. I'd like us to try a short journaling exercise together um, related to envisioning. And the reality is, it's so much easier to achieve something if you can actually visualize yourself already doing it, right? And rather than limiting ourselves, what I want to encourage you to do is just, think about how can you write the most optimistic script possible for yourself. And so the prompt is, if everything works out coming out of COVID-19, meeting or exceeding my most optimistic expectations, what will my life be like in 5 years? And just some sub bullets to this to get your juices flowing. But what's happening in your career and in your personal life? How do you feel? How are your relationships with others? So let's just take 3 minutes. We'll watch the clock here for you. And I want to encourage you to embrace this constraint of these 3 minutes, right? I listened to a podcast recently about embracing constraints, and it's really impacted the way I think about using time right now, because often if we just use those few minutes to get started, we can get so much more done. We might think, oh, I need 2 hours to work on my resume. Well, okay, maybe you need 2 hours, but what if you just spent 10 minutes? What could you get done in 10 minutes that would be progress for you, right? So let's try it with this envisioning exercise, and go ahead and begin. And in 3 minutes, I'll ring a bell to bring us back together. wrapping up the sentence that you're on. And now let's just take a minute individually to read to yourself what you wrote. Just a minute. All right. And so we're curious, so maybe we can share again in the chat here. In what ways was this helpful for you? Are there any surprises that came up? Oh, great. Yeah, so Varun created some optimism and a map. Great. Positivity. Oh, I love this. Will wrote, most of it sounds actually possible.
Yeah, terrific.
Yeah, it gives me hope. Awesome,
Mhm.
Michelle.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and before we started this process, Mark had written that the quality of questions asked in journaling makes all the difference, right? I think that's true. I think, and the thing is, these are coaching questions that we're trying to get to here, right? And digging deeply, seeing
Yeah.
a pathway to more satisfaction,
Hmm.
keeping an eye on the long term, identifying what's truly important. Yeah, an even richer life than had previously been envisioned.
And that was Valerie. Hi, Valerie. I recognize
Great.
the email address.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think the thing is, we're just taking 3 minutes to do this, right? It's not hours and hours of work, but there's a positive shift that we're hearing from many of you. And sometimes if you just find yourself feeling a little bit pulled down, a question like this can be really helpful to return to, right? Any kind of envisioning. Um, Back when I was in my 20s, one of the early influencers of this kind of work for me was Shakti Gawain, and she wrote a book called Creative Visualization, and I think that taking time to really imagine positive possibilities has had a huge influence on my life and my ability to get things done and to stay motivated and really work on that press side, right, of the equation, in the permapress model, but also the the things related to thriving. So really great suggestions coming up here.
And Shahnaz, I wholeheartedly agree with you too. I mean, I think the way that I've been able to get to doing the work that I love is really by doing a lot of visioning, and I just think it works magic. So yeah.
Yeah, and there are so many different ways to do this, right? I mean, sometimes people will write about their, writing their obituary. What do you want to imagine happening? But it's kind of shifting out of where you might feel limited and exploring what you really want and allowing yourself to want what you want and looking for what are the small steps you can take towards that possibility. I love what Ashley wrote here. This exercise dropped the constraints that I'm currently operating under and shifted the vision to what's ideal for me. Awesome. And agreement from Mandy. So that's great. Yeah, Lisa and I tried this out yesterday, and we left feeling really positive and energized about our collective futures. And so I would just encourage you, continue to build this out. You might be surprised at what you can gain in just a short period of time, but sometimes going back to it and revise. Everything's a draft, right? Think of everything as like draft level work, and just go back and keep making it better. It's great way to move forward. All right. And before we get into a little bit more open-ended Q&A, I thought I'd do a quick recap, which is, just remember to recognize that we do have choice in some ways, right? We might be told right now to stay at home, but there's a lot we do have choice about. And we can develop optimism, and there are some strategies for doing that we've talked about today. Check in with yourself on these permapress. Where are you doing with permapress? Not just today, but on an ongoing basis. Kind of, if you notice things are starting to feel like, oh, I'm not really getting where I thought I would, or I feel like I'm falling behind, or just not feeling energized, check in and see, how am I doing with strengths and challenges? Or it might even be recognizing when things are really feeling good and you're feeling really in flow, and just noticing, oh, okay, I've been sleeping better, or yeah, I've had a little bit more self-compassion, and here's how it's showing up in my life, right? And really taking time to envision yourself being successful, and the small steps towards moving yourself forward, making well-being and motivation a real priority for your life. I think these are some really helpful ways to help you think about staying the course and thriving during this time in particular.
Thank you, Shahnaz. Yeah, so again, as we start to bring the session to a close, we are going to be sharing some gifts with you post the session for everybody who registered. To begin with, a guided meditation. And Shahnaz recorded this on SoundCloud. It's fantastic. I listened to it. It's a 5-minute career search meditation. It's really, helping to bring you into a positive place, right? And really addressing that whole topic of visioning and visualizing like we've been discussing. The other thing that we have for you is a handout that includes journaling prompts on each one of these categories of permapress, so that you can, one, first step, obviously assessing yourself, and then two, targeting specific components of permapress to go deeper into and take some really positive action. And finally, within that handout as well, there's a resource guide with some terrific books that Shahnaz pulled together for independent study on each of these components as well. So look for that. And I'm checking the chat box because I see one more thing out there. Yeah, that's a private one, so I'll answer that. Absolutely, Terry, happy to talk offline with you. All right.
Yeah, and one thing I'll just add here, Lisa, I think one of the things, we did a survey recently with some of our own clients at Optimize You, and a lot of the folks there, when we were kind of checking in with them to see what would be particularly helpful for them right now, and guided meditations was, I think, the number one thing that we were hearing from folks. And I think it's, people want to feel a sense of calmness. They want to feel collected and centered. And so, for many of us, this is a really powerful way to come back to what matters most to us, and just kind of, turn the volume down on some of the noise that might be going on for us. So, so look for, we'll share this one also on the Optimize You website. Our plan is that we're going to build out more meditations on the website with things like this particular one. So if you find it helpful, well, for one, let me know. I'd love to hear from you if you think it's helpful, or other topics that would be interesting for you to have kind of customized. We're just kind of exploring doing that work together, building on some of the work that I've done previously in Search Inside Yourself and Mindful Self-Compassion. But this particular meditation, is really about extending kindness to yourself in the job search process as you visualize your future career desires and building a life where you're thriving.
All right. So I'm just responding to some of the chat here privately. But yeah, just to, again, draw this to a close, we just scratched the surface of these topics today, Shahnaz. But, I think it's important to remember that even during this challenging time, there's a lot to feel really hopeful about. For one thing, it's springtime in Ann Arbor. You know, we actually did get snow this morning, but it truly is spring. The sun is going to rise tomorrow morning, and you know, we are going to make it through this time and be better for it. So I'd like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank Shahnaz for being here, and to all of you for being here as well. If you'd like to explore this topic of especially mindful self-compassion further, feel free to reach out to Shahnaz directly. I actually shared her Optimize You email address on the screen. I'm going to send this PDF out afterwards so you can access that as well. And if you want to talk through your career search with me or any of the other subjects that that some of you posted, I'm glad to do that. So please reach out to me. My email is rossalumnicareers@umich.edu. So please feel free to do that. So at this point, we're going to stay on the line and address further questions through the chat box. But I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording. So I'm going to do that first. And as I do that, just want to say thanks so much again, everybody, and have a great day and stay well.